You're listening to the Platform Launchers podcast. I'm John Stange, and it's great to have you with us again this week because we're going to be talking about building, growing, and monetizing your online platform. And we're always excited to be able to do this. And once a month, we have the privilege to bring on a guest expert. Now, you're going to have to wait 1 minute before I introduce our guest expert to you. I'll tell you his name. His name is Andy Storch, and I'm going to fill you in on a lot of fun details about him before I introduce him. But before we get to Andy Storch, we've got a couple members that we want to highlight because of some of the wins that they've had this week. So first up, Jody Skinner, tell us about the win you had this week with your platform.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we've had a big week for my small publishing company, which is called Smidgen Press. Well, big several weeks, actually, because we've got a big site and a store update in progress. And I mean, honestly, the best part is just we've been connecting with so many readers, either ones that we've known for a while or new ones to us. So finding more bookworms is always fun. Probably the biggest thing happening this week is we have a new book coming out. This one is, we do fiction and nonfiction, quite a few different genres so far, but this one's a nonfiction resource, probably most interesting to homeschoolers. It's by a British educator whose name was Charlotte Mason, and we're putting out a 100th anniversary edition of her final work. So that's really exciting.
Love it. Where can people get it?
They can find us at smidgenpress.com. That's SMIDGEN.
All right, smidgenpress.com. Great win, Jody. Awesome. Next up, Melinda Walker. Tell us about your win.
My win is 665 downloads of my podcast that is found everywhere. It's called Profitable Pet Sitter. And I have consistently emailed my audience every Monday in 2023. My name is Melinda Walker, and my mission is to transform passionate pet people into profitable pet sitters.
We love it, and we love the alliteration, and that's an awesome win. And people can find you at profitablepetsitter.com, correct?
That's right.
Awesome. So I hope that they check it out. And when you get there, you're going to realize what an understated win that was, because her business has been really doing an awesome thing, and it's been really growing. And so, Melinda, congrats. It's a great win. Very cool. Well, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we have a guest, one of my friends. His name is Andy Storch. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Andy. Andy is an author. He is a consultant. He is a coach. He is a speaker, and he's a facilitator on a mission to get the most out of life and inspire others to do the exact same. He's also the author of the book, Own Your Career, Own Your Life. If you're watching on video, I have my copy, which happens to be a signed copy right here that I got, I think, the week that it came out. But he wrote Own Your Career, Own Your Life not that long ago. It's a book designed to help professionals stop drifting and take control of their futures. Andy is also the host of several podcasts, including the Talent Development Hot Seat, Own Your Career, and My NFT Journey. He's also the co-founder and the host of the Talent Development Think Tank Conference and Community, as well as the host of the Talent Development Virtual Summit. And I understand that he's gotten rather good at the game of pickleball. And so help me welcome my good friend, Andy Storch. Andy, welcome to the Platform Launchers podcast.
John, thank you so much for that warm welcome. Thank you for inviting me to your group and to your podcast. And hello to everybody joining us today. You have such an awesome group. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you here. And you've obviously fully embraced all the different things that you can do with an online business and an online platform and all sorts of things. And so I know that there's a lot that we in our group here can learn from you. And so I wonder, for starters, just tell us a little bit about your business and how you decided to build it, because every business owner has a journey and something that led them to where they're at. And I'd love to know kind of your, as they would say, like in the Marvel universe, your origin story.
Yeah, well, I'll be happy to share that. And as I share it, I can give you kind of the piece by piece of my business. I'd say there's kind of two main parts to it now. And it all started about almost 7 years ago in 2016, where I was working as a consultant in a consulting firm and started getting really into personal development, as I'm sure many people here have done, gone down that journey, and a lot of self-discovery and realizing that this is not what I want to be doing. I want to be doing something more. Something's missing for me. And so I went down this journey, listened to a lot of podcasts, reading a lot of books, going to conferences, joining masterminds, all that sort of stuff. And what I realized for me is I had a strong pull towards entrepreneurship. And I'm guessing there are many others in this group that have felt that pull in different ways. And it was a surprise for me. There were no entrepreneurs in my family. I don't think I even knew what an entrepreneur was when I was growing up. But I felt that pull. And so I started trying to figure out, how do I make that happen? And I started really connecting with people. Originally, my jump started by reading a book called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. I don't know how many of you have read that book and started that process. Started practicing The Miracle Morning back in 2016. Went to his conference in November of 2016. It was called the Best Year Ever Blueprint event. I don't think he runs it anymore, but it was like the first time where I was like, I'm going to go to this personal development conference on my own and not like a work thing. And made a friend go with me, had a great time, made some connections, which led to a mastermind I joined for dads the next year, and then getting into other masterminds and membership communities. And in 2017, I launched my first podcast, which was called the Entrepreneur Hot Seat. And it was really just a way to learn about entrepreneurship because I had no idea what to do. And so I started interviewing all these entrepreneurs. As you do, you get into entrepreneurship. And I remember there was a moment I had where I was like, this is crazy. Like, people are taking time to talk to me who might not normally, do that, as you found, John, in your journey, and many others maybe. And my wife, who's a former journalist, was like, yeah, obviously, because they want the publicity. And I was like, oh, I didn't really think about that. So that started to kind of grow. And the next year, I left that consulting firm to become an independent consultant through an organization that I was connected with, or a good friend of mine was working. And I launched my next podcast, which was the Talent Development Hot Seat. And when I launched that podcast, it was as a way to get meetings essentially with my ideal prospects for my business. We were selling training, like leadership development training, to companies. And I would typically be working with people who worked in talent development, learning and development, training and development in big companies. And I noticed, some people were hard to get to. I'm sending emails, LinkedIn requests, and they're just really busy. So I started this podcast, and I sent them an invitation to come on the podcast, and they'd say yes. And I was like, oh, this is a great way to build relationships. So I actually said when I started that, I don't care if anybody listens. Obviously, I'm going to try to make a quality product, but I'm going to use this to build relationships with my ideal client. And that worked really well because I started building lots of great relationships. And people did actually tune in and listen to it. I started building a brand in that space. And that grew to a point where in 2019, my friend Bennett Phillips and I decided to try and host a conference together. And that conference was going to be for people in talent development. And the impetus for that was that I had been going to other conferences in the HR and talent development space as a way to learn about what's going on and meet potential prospects, right, in that business. And they were also freaking boring, like just death by PowerPoint. You guys have been to all these boring conferences where it's just someone lecturing at you and it's not particularly interesting. And quite frankly, they're not a very good speaker. They might be an expert, not taking anything away from them, but they're not very dynamic on stage. And I'm looking around and thinking there's so many people in this audience we could be learning from. Kind of like right now, you and I are recording this, there's 25 people on this Zoom call. And I know I can learn something from every single person on here. And so I always hate that, like, we just can listen to one person, right? And I thought we could create something.
We could all talk at the same time if you want.
We could all, right, exactly. Let's all share our best practices. But I thought I'd create something where we could learn from each other. And so we started building this conference in 2019. And we were able to secure some pretty big name speakers, but it was still two guys nobody ever heard of. So it was like a gargantuan marketing effort to build this conference that ended up happening in January of 2020. And it actually worked out really well. We sold out the conference after like a ton of marketing and sales, and everything went really well. It was a huge, huge hit. And so then we started selling tickets to the next one. And you guys know what happened 2 months later in March of 2020. In fact, you and I are recording this right now, 3 years essentially to the day when the world shut down this week.
Yeah, pretty much.
In 2020. And at that time, I knew that people were not going to be going to conferences anymore for quite some time. And I had it in my head that, it would be a good idea to start a membership community for this group of people. I had been involved in multiple membership communities, including the one where you and I met, John, and Jennifer, where we met years ago. And I had been thinking about it, talking about it, and I was still affiliated with this company, and we couldn't quite work out how we were going to do it together. And that is when I actually went out completely on my own, fully independent in, I think, April or May of 2020, and launched the Talent Development Think Tank membership community, because the podcast, the conference wasn't going to be happening anymore. And so that has kind of slowly grown since that day. I'm still running that today. I also hosted the conference again recently, actually 2 weeks ago, and we can debrief that. And then during 2020, I was also writing my book, which is called Own Your Career, Own Your Life. And I published that in November of 2020 with the goal of building a business around that as a speaker and creating my own kind of training around it as well. And of course, that was sidetracked by a couple things. Number one, obviously the pandemic shut down the whole world. And when I started writing it in January 2020, I was like, I'm going to be a keynote speaker. And then the pandemic happened. I was like, I am not going to be a speaker, because that is not going to happen. But you know what? It's interesting how when you stick with something over time, you go overcome those challenges, and things have come back. So the pandemic. I also, as you, John, and some others know, was diagnosed with testicular cancer right before I published the book. And that spread through my stomach and my neck. And I ended up going through treatment for that in early 2021. But I got through all of that and published the book and got through all of that, and, kept pushing, the business and the brand and speaking, and ended up building a business on that side of things, so that I now work with large companies to help them improve their engagement and retention by teaching their employees to own their careers. And I do that primarily through keynote speaking and a training program that I've created. And there's an online course, of course, which you showed on your website. So if you look at my business today, there's kind of two parts. There's the talent development side, which is a podcast membership community and events. And then on the career development side, I do keynote speaking and training for big companies.
So you know what I love, and I have a question for you that I'm going to revisit something you said, but this is what I love about every time I interview Andy Storch. I think I've done, this might be my third or fourth podcast interview that I've done with you. All I need to do is say, hello, Andy, and I need to have no questions prepared, because he will take it from there.
So hey, be careful now. I hope I'm not talking too much, but I want to give a comprehensive,
everything
overview.
You said was, no, it was great. And I'm just saying, from the interviewers standpoint, you are always a very easy person to interview. I never have to pull information out of you. So you said something earlier that I want to revisit, because I know a lot of the people that listen to this show, and some of us here that are live on the call, can benefit from this. One of the things that many of us do is we offer coaching. And I know that, I would say that a large percentage of people here in the Members Club they offer coaching, and people oftentimes debate how much they should charge for coaching. I typically encourage people, if they feel that their market can bear it, and by the way, many, if not most markets can bear it, to charge $200 an hour and see if you could bump up from there over time. And I know people that charge $1,000 per hour, and I know one person that charges $2,500 per hour. And here's a hack that you kind of alluded to that I think could be useful for some of us that may feel like, all right, I'm at an early stage of platform development, and I don't necessarily feel like I have the budget to pay for the kind of coaching I would like. I would encourage people to take the approach that Andy just mentioned in his introduction, where if you have a podcast, you can invite some high-level people onto your podcast, and you can ask them, as part of the interview, the questions that you would have asked them in a coaching session. And before you know it, you just got a free coaching session that probably would have cost you at least $1,000 or a couple $1,000. I have done that multiple times.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. It's one of the side perks of having your own media channel.
Right. Or mentors, people that you would love to just, pick their brain and ask them questions and learn from them. You invite them on a podcast or to speak in your community.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned a variety of things there that are good springboards for us to talk about. My follow-up to, I have several follow-ups, and you alluded to some of them, so I'm just going to take them one at a time. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is branding. because I see, so if you're watching us on video, people could see an image of your book behind your head. You
Yep.
also have a podcast that goes by the same title, Own Your Career, Own Your Life.
Yep.
And you've turned that into a brand. You've also turned your own name into a brand, and some of the other things that you're doing with talent development and all of that. And I wonder if you could maybe speak to that, because many of us on the call here, we're building platforms, we're developing different things online, and there's a certain amount of branding that goes into that when you repeat the title of what you've created and you describe something. So could you give
Yeah.
us some insight, maybe some things you've learned related to that?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I don't by any means consider myself a branding expert. In fact, I probably haven't invested enough time and thought into branding over the years, but I do think it is very, very important, especially when it comes to whatever your main product or your personal brand is. I'm a big fan of developing the personal brand. I have a chapter in my book about it. I have sessions I run in companies. I teach people about personal brand. I have a lot of friends who are experts in the personal branding space. And yeah, there's the book. Thank you, John. I do think it's like, especially as an entrepreneur, but even as a corporate professional, one of those things that can really set you up for future success in building a personal brand. And your personal brand essentially is your reputation, right? It's what people think and say about you when you're not around. And that, comes a lot from how you act and treat other people and the way you put yourself out there. But of course, also, how are you presenting yourself out on social media, online, in a way where people can see you? How often do they see you? What type of consistency? And then there's the actual branding of, hey, do you have a logo? Do you have colors that people might see or recognize if you're putting a podcast together? For me and my business, when it comes to like the speaking and training with companies, my book is incredibly important to that. It is like the central point of everything that I do. And so obviously right now I've got the Zoom background on with my phone on, with my background on, and that book on there. But most of the time, as we were saying before we started recording, I have a lot of great natural light in front of me. Most of the time when I'm on Zoom calls doing interviews or talks or whatever it is, it's daylight, and I take the virtual background off, and I have a poster of the book on the wall behind me as well, so people can always see it. I post everywhere about my book. Whenever I connect with any potential prospects who might possibly hire me or influence other people, I send them a copy of my book, or I ask if I could send them a copy of my book. You mentioned, John, I sent you a copy of my book. You were actually one of the very first, I think, first 10 people I sent a copy of my book to.
I am honored. I did not know that.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that. And, you were near the top of the list because you are a very influential person. I want that book in your hands, right? And I do it with no expectations. I don't get disappointed that people are like, I didn't read it, or I didn't post about it or whatever, because I know 1 or 2 out of 10 people will. And so I like those odds. So I'm just putting that out there all the time. I have in the last couple of years hired a really great marketing VA who does branding for me now. And we create nicer graphics and things around all the stuff I do. When I host the conference, when I host a virtual summit, I know how important it is to have really nice graphics out there that makes you look professional, because we have a few people that are involved in publishing here, right? Jody and Jennifer.
Oh yeah, a lot of us.
Quite a few, right?
Yeah.
And how the difference when someone picks up a book, whether you self-publish or not, if it looks self-published or if it looks, professionally published. And it's the same with anything else. If you're hosting an event, you want it to look well done. And a lot of people are just kind of like, well, I'm going to try to, I'm not making that much money, so I'm going to save money and I'm going to make this graphic myself. And a lot of times it doesn't, come off looking good. Now I find now using Canva, if you have like the premium Canva account, like I can make some really nice looking graphics, but I'd still rather pay somebody to create some really great stuff. And I have a guy who does that for me. So I think that's a worthwhile investment sometimes. Being thoughtful about what is the brand that you want to portray. And then, how often do you want to put that out there? What do you want people to think about you and say about you? What's the image you want to portray? And then I always ask myself, like, am I acting in alignment with that? And, John, you're very active on social media. I see your stuff everywhere. I kind of know what you're about and what you're doing, because you're very good and of course you're very authentic about it as well. And I try to be the same way. And I've seen so many examples over the years. If I just put something out about a topic a few times, the people start to associate me with that. And it's really interesting to see. And so because I've had that podcast, I'm on LinkedIn every day. I post a lot about the Own Your Career stuff and then the talent development stuff. I have built, a brand in those spaces.
Well, you brought up the book as being a central part of that brand. And so I want
Yeah.
to dig a little bit deeper into that because there are, I would say most of the people that are live here on this call either have a book already or maybe multiple, or are seriously considering releasing one at some point.
Yep.
And there's a variety of things that I've noticed through the years in writing. It's one of my favorite things to do. Releasing books has been immensely helpful.
Yeah.
I have a quick question and then a longer question related to
Okay.
this. When you released your book, how concerned were you that it got a lot of sales?
Oh, it's such a leading question, John. I didn't really care at all about the sales for my book. I'm a
Oh,
disciple of the,
all right.
yeah,
I'll let you finish your answer. I was just going to say the why. Like, make sure you tell us
yeah.
why.
Well, of course I want my book I want my book in more people's hands, and I would love for people to buy the book. I didn't have like high expectations for that. I'm a disciple of Honore Corridor, who many of you know, and I know, John, you worked with her. Jennifer, Honore, who is a book coach and mentor. I went through her program when I was publishing my book. And, when like the way she operates and sets things up is like, it's great if your book sells copies, but you make the real money from the clients that you get from the book, right? So when I talk about getting the book in the right people's hands, I hope people are buying the book, but I'm still sending out lots of free copies. I want to get it in the hands of people. I want that book out there in the wild, as they would say, and people reading it and doing stuff with it.
Well, that's I did not know exactly what you would say when I asked that question, but I suspected that it would be along those lines because I think a lot of times people think that when you write a book that the end goal is that you sell a whole bunch of copies of the
Yeah,
book. And maybe
right,
that happens and maybe it doesn't. It's certainly nice if a book sells well. Who wouldn't want that to be the case?
right, of
But
course,
there's benefit, but you can't control if it sells well, is kind of my point.
sure,
But what you can control is the fact that if you take the time to release a book, you now have something that whether or not people even read it, it's an authority piece that establishes your platform in a very meaningful way.
that's
And I
right.
watched you do that over the course of creating your book and presenting that to the public and now using that as you connect with audiences. And I would suspect, I already know your story, I know that this has happened, that you having that book has put you in front of audiences, it's put you in front of leaders, it's earned you income that is beyond what the book itself would very likely earn a typical author.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've probably made a few $100s, maybe here and there from book sales. I've made well into six figures from
Mhm.
clients that have hired me from the brand that I built around the book.
Right. Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. I think that that's a benefit of writing a book that many people don't give enough thought to.
Mhm.
But to me, it's kind of just like maybe a good way to phrase is like playing the long game, thinking bigger about the book than just the book itself. It
Yeah.
can lead to many other things and open up many other doors. It's useful to know. So just tell us though, if someone is listening to us on the podcast or maybe watching us via YouTube, tell us a little bit about the process of writing the book and publishing the book and how all that went for you. Did you struggle with any intimidation? Like, did it seem like an impossible task? Because
Mm.
your book isn't like 10 pages. This is a long book.
No, it's a well, we could talk about that. It's funny you talk about like intimidating. I'm on a call now with a lot of people live on here who've probably written more books and know more about books than I do. But obviously, we all have our own experience with creating and producing a book. So for me, I self-published my book. When I started out, I had the idea. The idea came to me while I was at a conference in London in November 2019. It's funny how clear it was. I was actually getting interviewed by a friend of mine named Philip Van Dusen for his YouTube channel for digital creative artists or agencies. And we were having this conversation over lunch, and it just like struck me like, you've done all these things, you've given these talks on these things. This could be a book. Just put it together this way. I don't know how that came to be, but I came back from there knowing the book that I wanted to write, including the title. And but I had never written a book, and I had never even written a blog. I hadn't really written that much. I've been hosting podcasts for a couple of years. So I'm very lucky to have a big network and to know several authors already. So I started putting it out there, asking people, how long is a typical business book? And of course, the answer came back across the board for the most part, but between 40 and 60,000 words, about 50,000 words on average. And I thought, man, 50,000 words, that's a lot of words. I don't know if I could write that many words, it's very intimidating, right? And I remember I had a conversation with Honore, who I mentioned earlier.
Honore's
And
been on the show last month. She was our guest expert last month.
oh, love it. Okay. You must write a book. You must market your book.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'd read that book and I had reached out to her, and she said, you don't worry about writing 50,000 words. You just write 500 words a day for 100 days and you'll have 50,000 words. And I remember she also said, you probably write emails that are 500 words. And I was like, I do. I don't know. I don't know if I do, but I'm sure that's probably true. So that's what I did. I started roughly around January 1st of 2020. And I just set a goal. I'm big on goals and habits. Like once I set on something, like I'm going to do this thing, I made my outline. I'm going to write 500 words a day for 100 days. And I just wrote every morning, usually between 6 and 7 a.m. I'm kind of an early morning guy. And I did that all the way through April. And I ended up writing, I think about 65,000 words or something like that. And I looked back and I only missed a couple days and my average was like 538 words a day or something like that. So, and I'm very lucky that it kind of came to me. I had the outline. I knew what I wanted to write. I didn't get too sidetracked or tripped up. And then of course came the editing process, which is much more difficult. But I'm glad I followed people's advice. Multiple people gave me the advice that, and Jennifer's on, she'll tell you this, you don't edit while you write, right? You just write and then you edit later. And so I just wrote, and then I gave it to my wife, who is a former journalist. And I was really scared to do that, but I did it. And she went through it and she said, this is great. Like, but this section over here is way too long. Take this out, take this out. So then I took some stuff out. We cut it down to probably 55,000 words. And then I hired a professional editor who went through it, and, it turned it into this sea of red. And then I procrastinated for several weeks because I didn't want to like go in and go through all the changes. But then I finally did, and we got it edited. And, I hired a cover designer, I hired an interior, formatter to format the book. And then I formed like an early reader team, launch team, who went through it. And, it's interesting when you do that, you think like, well, most of these people are just friends, like helping you market, the book or something. But there were like probably 2 or 3 or 4 people who really went through it with a fine tooth comb and found like 7 or 8 other errors that, even the professional editor didn't find, because there's always something, right? And a couple of these people, I was like, you have a career for you in like proofreading or editing or something, right? But it was really awesome to get that help from people. And then we launched it. I published it in November 16th, 2020.
Awesome. Very cool. And it's a signature piece. It's a big part of your brand. It establishes your authority. And there's something else I think that's kind of special when somebody writes a book. To me, it establishes you as a very serious person, because it demonstrates a level of discipline and a long-sighted view. If somebody can create a book, that does communicate something to me where I think, all right, this is the type of person that can work on something hard for a long period of time and see it to the finish line. And I think in some ways there's a subtlety that gets communicated when you present someone a book and say, yeah, I wrote this. And I think that kind of builds your stock in some people's minds as a result. And with that in mind, I have one final question for you before we segue into our members only Q&A. And the final question here for the podcast relates to entrepreneurship and transitioning from your traditional career into the kind of career that you have now. Because again, the book is Own Your Career, Own Your Life. And you're not just an author or a theorist, you are a practitioner.
That's
so
right.
if anyone is listening to us on the podcast or any of our members club that's live on the call with us, or if anyone's watching on YouTube, take us just on a brief tour of that journey from traditional employment into this self-employed entrepreneurship that you now live out.
Yeah, well, I mentioned, and I know there's a lot of people that aspire for this, and I know several today who are trying to figure that out. And it's such a big leap, but man, I'm so glad I did it. And I know many people are as well. I had that inkling, as I mentioned. It just started really gnawing on me going back to 2016. I started listening to a lot of podcasts, reading books, joined, a mastermind group. And I launched that first podcast. And then the second one, for me, I was very lucky because I did have sort of a bridge into entrepreneurship. I mentioned that I became like an independent consultant with an organization called Advantage Performance Group, where I was sort of like a 1099 commission only like salesperson and trainer, if you will. But I was like supported by this organization. They kind of had my back before I went completely on my own. So, step one, there's like, but this exists for a lot of people. Like, can you find a bridge if you're not sure exactly what you're going to do? Is there an organization where you could work more as a contractor, 1099? Can you leave a company you have with a contract, something like that? But even, taking a step back from that, I think it's really important to get really clear. And this is where I talk with people about owning your career, is do some self-assessment and get really clear on your strengths and weaknesses, your values, your energizers, what you really care about, and what you really want. Because, it's cool to see what other people are doing in your network. And oftentimes we get caught up in like, oh, they started a business, maybe I should too. Or they're going out for, trying to become a vice president, maybe I should too. Or, they're moving here, maybe I should too, whatever. But get to know what you truly want and then put a plan together to achieve that. And don't be afraid to ask for help, to invest in yourself, right? I mean, John, I know you've done a ton of that. Many people here on the live call, they've obviously invested in themselves joining this community. I've invested a ton in joining mastermind groups, membership communities, going to conferences, hiring coaches, you name it. And it's continued to pay off. Every now and then there's something like, that wasn't that great. But most of the time it pays off in spades. And that's how I got where I did. And also how I built up all this knowledge about how to help other people with their careers, because I did all the work on myself. And then the last thing I would add is, I know we're speaking primarily to entrepreneurs and those who want to be entrepreneurs, but I speak primarily in my corporate work to corporate professionals who don't want to be entrepreneurs. And, when you start going down this road of trying to become an entrepreneur and you listen to these podcasts and you hear all these people say things like, well, if you don't like your job, you need to quit the 9-to-5 and go start your own business, right? And that might resonate with some of us. It certainly did with me. But a lot of people, like clients I work with, people I talk to in the corporate world, like they don't want to become an entrepreneur. They don't want to start their own business. They're not into the, the risk and the like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills next month and that kind of thing. Like they want the security and, the camaraderie and the collaboration, all that sort of stuff. So everybody's on their own path. Everybody has their own thing that's going to work out well for them. Not everybody's cut out to be an entrepreneur. But what everybody does want is everybody wants to feel fulfilled and happy in their career, whatever it is. And I want to be able to help people do that. So I'm on a mission to spread that message, to teach people how to own their career so that they can find that fulfillment and happiness, whatever it is for them in their career and in their life.
Great counsel from my good friend, Andy Storch. Andy, where is the best place people can find you if they want to follow up more?
Oh, well, John, I'm all over the place. I'm very active
are.
I'm very active on LinkedIn. Of course, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and that sort of stuff as well. Just about everything is on my website, andystorch.com. And if you're looking for some career resources, in addition to my book, which is on Amazon, you can go to andystorch.com/career, and you can click on bonus resources and you can download the free guide to owning your career. I think I also have the top 5 most common career mistakes and even my morning affirmations on there as well.
Well, Andy, thanks for your generosity with us. And now our members in just a moment are going to have the opportunity to spend a little extra time with Andy Storch for our members only Q&A. If you're listening to us on the podcast or if you're watching this via YouTube, I want to let you know about something new we have here in Platform Launchers that's going to allow you to actually see this members only Q&A should you choose to do so. We just released this week the opportunity. It's on our university page. So if you go to platformlaunchers.com/university, you can purchase a 48-hour pass to our video library. And there you can see our interviews and our Q&A time with all of our past guest experts and our current guest expert, Andy Storch. So by the time you hear my voice, it'll be there. If you want that 48-hour video pass, you can get it at platformlaunchers.com/university. But that is it for us this week. Thanks again for spending a little time with us, and we look forward to catching up with you again right here next time.